Hey folks, so I'm now wrapping up this series, the Intermediate Python series, where I'm making a desktop app in Python using PySimpleGUI, and it's a very elaborate app, so it's got a lot of opportunities to show off intermediate Python concepts. So it's a Dropbox clone, and instead of going off to a remote server, it's sharing files among a local network. So we had to write a whole peer-to-peer networking thing and just a whole bunch of different file management stuff, and now we're at the point where we're ready to finalize, optimize, and beautify all of the things that we've been working on. So I am particularly looking forward to doing this because I have been embarrassed every single time I've had to show off this interface. Like, man, it's so bad. It's just terrible, right? And the reason it's been terrible this whole time is you're supposed to wait until the end of a project before you start doing all the UI stuff. Because if you start tweaking with the UI in the beginning of the project, things are going to change. You never really know what things you're going to need graphics for or whatever. Like, if you spend too much time on the UI and things change, you just waste all that time, you know? So we've left it ugly, despite my sincere desire not to, and we're going to turn it into this. This is a beautiful, finalized version of this. So let's do that. Now, the first thing we need to do, though, is make sure that we're optimizing and fixing some issues that are present in our current code base here. The first one is that when I first started the series 10 months ago, the way that you do async IO stuff has changed dramatically. So the whole way that I'm doing all this has been deprecated in Python 3.8, and in Python 3.10, it's going to remove this entirely. Like this is not going to work in Python 3.10. Now, we're working in Python 3.7 for this entire series, but it's a good idea to just get this done right now because it's a simple fix here where they don't want us to use this wait anymore, which you see I'm calling in this loop thing, which they also don't want to do, and stuff in this main function in here that's full of all these waiting things. And we don't actually have to tweak too much because we just need to stop using this wait. Like, they don't want you to directly call wait at all because it causes all kinds of weird problems. It didn't cause any problems, but it does cause various issues. So they don't want people using this anymore. So we want to swap that over to a gather. But gather works differently than wait, where with wait we could just give it a big list of the things we wanted it to do in the background. With gather, it wants something different. Like, it's not quite a list, but it can accept a whole bunch of different coroutines. Let me see if it shows this correctly. Like, see, coroutine, any, like, it'll accept a whole bunch of coroutines, but doesn't want them inside of a list. So the way that we do that is just blowing up this list by putting a star in front of it. And that's it. Like, that has just made this Python 3.8 plus compatible. So that was an easy fix right there. So previously, this whole loop thing that I'm doing over here was the way to do it. Like, you assign something to a loop here and you say, okay, we'll run these things, and in more complex apps, you'd be passing around this loop all over your app. We don't need to do that anymore. It's actually simplified, so we'll still do this async IO get event loop, but now we don't need to keep track of it. So we basically just do this here, where we're saying, all right, get the event loop and run until complete this thing that I have going on here. Now, I want to clean this up a little bit because this is kind of a sloppy way of doing this. So I'm going to change this main here to our looper. Let's just make it clear that this isn't our main function. This is the function that loops all of the things we want to have happen. And I'm going to make a new function that is not asynchronous, and I'm going to make this one our main. And here is where I'm going to put this instruction here that it should be starting everything up. And it's a looper here. It wants a asynchronous function. So we give it looper there. And now we can run main if this is the file that is starting up our program. But this should not be the file that starts up our program. And I was only doing this in the beginning because it made life easier for demonstration purposes. It makes life way more complex though. So you honestly shouldn't even do this because the current working directory of our program is really, really relevant. So right now we've been exclusively working inside of our source code directory because that's obviously where we're putting our source code. But we don't want that to be the current working directory because it's going to spawn the cache and the database wherever the current working directory is. So outside of that source code directory is where we'd actually want to start our app. So that this, like, I guess we'll call it the project directory. So yeah, we got a parent project directory, and then inside of that is a lowercase drip box, And that is going to call the source code that's inside the uppercase Dropbox source code directory. And here is a simple, like, we're basically doing the same thing already here, where I'm calling the loop and doing all this stuff that we're not supposed to do anymore. So here I'm going to say from Dropbox import main, and then we do the main clause here, and that's it. And that's exactly how PyCharm here is set up to use this lowercase Dropbox. And now when we run our program, everything still works, but now it's working in a way that is compatible with 3.8 and onwards. This is particularly important for this app because of the, I described the current working directory situation, and we get to take advantage of that with this debugging test client I have over here, which is basically doing the same thing where I'm actually doing a tester main, which is doing its own tester debugging things that help me test and debug things. But because it's being run from the same directory as Dropbox.py, it's going to share the same database and cache directories. So that keeps things clean, it keeps things consistent, and it's important. Keep track of this. You don't want to run stuff from your source code directory. It makes things bad, and it's actually incompatible on all POSIX systems, like on Linux and macOS. Running that init would cause all kinds of weird issues with importing because that is outside of where the virtual environment would be in a POSIX system. So just don't run stuff from your source code directory. All right, so now we're at the point where we can start to optimize our code instead of just fix outstanding issues. So let's do that. The first thing that I want to do here is stop being insane about this read timeout here. So this right here is our main apps loop where it's loading up the UI, it's drawing the UI. This read command is actually how it draws whatever the UI is. It says to spawn this UI and then wait for a button press. And if I push a button, we get an event, and that event with its value comes through and it does all the checking here. And in this case, since we don't have anything assigned to this remove thing, it's just printing it out here. And if we didn't have this timeout set, it would just sit here forever. It would just always be stuck waiting for a button press, and then none of our background processes would happen. And you see background processes are continuing to happen here, which is important for our app. So we've got all kinds of a lot of different things moving on in this app that need to continue to move, even if you're not pushing a button. So the timeout says that, okay, every second just back out away from whatever this is. We're not worrying about it for a second here, and we're going to do anything else that needs to be taken care of. So it's generating this timeout, which is like effectively serving the same role as me pushing this button and generating an event. This is generating a timeout event that we're actually handling for not to print out every second. It's spitting out another one of these timeout events, which gets it through into this loop where at the bottom of the loop it says, okay, sleep. And that's the async IO version of, okay, back out, let's see what else we've got going on. And I want to show you a really interesting and informative thing when we look at the task manager here on Windows. And this Python instance you see here is this little app here. And that's insane, right? Like, holy shit, that is 11 to 12% of my CPU is being used on this little thing. Like, if you look at this, I'm running an i7, okay? There's no way this little thing should be taking up 12% of my CPU. And like, at this point, you're probably looking at like, oh my God, this dude has wasted all my time. What is even going on here? We obviously shouldn't make applications in Python because it's so damn slow. Like, I've wasted so many hours watching this. And like, as I've been bitching about that, I just changed the timeout to 10. And I have dramatically decreased the performance cost here down to around 2%. And that's while it's doing a lot of initial start processes where it's doing a port scan all over my network. So in about like 5 minutes, it probably calms down a bit. Yeah, that's a much more manageable amount of system resources to be hogging up, because now you can run that in the background. You don't even care. You see all the other things that are running in my background right now. I don't care about any of those little ones and twos. Like, this just doesn't matter. So our program is actually quite optimized now by just changing that timeout from 1 to 10. So it's out 10 seconds. It spits out, I don't know if it's like 10 seconds or 10 milliseconds. Honestly, it's really fast because everything stays really responsive here, and it seems to be doing all this stuff back there. So I don't know, I did some experimenting with pushing this up higher, and it didn't seem to make a difference. 10 was where it started to be good, so I'm leaving it at 10. So in the same vein of trying to be kinder to our users and their system, let's also stop being insane in our file management. At the bottom, we've got a check local files thing that's running around, checking to see if any of the files we're sharing amongst our network has changed anyway. So we're looking at the modified date, and we're looking at if the modified date has changed to check the hash of it. And all these processes are designed in a way that's reasonable. It's first checking the modified date before it does the more computationally expensive process of checking the hash. But it's doing all this every 10 seconds. And that is just a hugely unnecessary hit on our hard drives, especially if we've got SSD drives. Like that's just way unnecessary. So by changing this and adding a *60, I've now changed it from 10 seconds to 10 minutes. And, you change it to whatever is appropriate for your app, 15, 10, 5, whatever. I'll leave it at 10 seconds if that's what you need. I think 10 minutes is probably a suitable amount of delay here. And now that's a lot less hitting the hard drive unnecessarily. In the same vein, we can further optimize this by changing all these areas where I'm hitting the database to find out, what kind of files we're sharing. We can stuff all that in the memory really easy. Like it's small. It's not going to be a performance hit if we put the 5 or 6 things into memory that are tiny. So instead of constantly hitting the hard drive to check the database, we're just going to load the relevant stuff into our app in its memory. So the best way to do that is actually in our database reload shares. We've got a function built specifically for this task that I've been inconsistent about its use because it was one extra thing I had to deal with, and when I was doing the networking stuff, I wanted to make that as standalone as possible so that people didn't have to follow all the other stuff that was going on. So I didn't want to import a lot of different functions from the main Dropbox app. But now that we're trying to finalize everything, we should definitely make use of this because this is going to greatly reduce the system load of this. But there's a small problem with the way that this is currently structured. I don't know if this is true about TinyMongo, but it's definitely true about Big MongoDB. So I should show you the right way to do this. When you do a find, which is just a general, give you a whole bunch of things that match whatever my query is. In this case, I'm just saying, give me everything. But if you put in a query here and you say find, it's going to give you a cursor. Rather than all the little data bits that you expect to be getting, you're actually getting a thing that's saying, here's how you can know what you want to know. So as you go through and you're like iterating through that and saying, okay, well, what's the first thing that you got as a result of this query to the database? It gives you the data just immediately and transparently. So you as the programmer don't even really pay attention to this. But as you go through this list, it loses track of all the things at the top. So if you get down to the third item, you ask, okay, well, what was the first item again? It doesn't remember. It doesn't know. So that's a problem when we're going to be using this in our memory in a lot of different locations. We don't want to store this cursor in the memory because then the first thing that runs through it is going to break it, and then anything else that runs through it won't be able to find the relevant data. So let's instead stuff this into a list here. And this is a simple list comprehension where I'm saying that when you do a for loop, you do for I in whatever. We're doing that basically here, where I'm declaring I as my variable, and I'm stuffing these I's into a list here. And this will make it iterate through that list as I was describing, and it'll get all the data for it. But it's going to save all that data into this list, and we're saving that now as a variable, like a global here in our main project called shares. We need to now make sure that we do the same thing actually in the in it where we declare the shares thing. I'm doing the same problem here. So I for I in, and that solves the problem right there. Completely avoids the cursor problems. And as you see, I've left myself a lot of notes because I spent the entire month of October trying to figure out exactly what order to be showing you things, because I know I'm going to be bouncing all over this program throughout these next few videos. And I want to make sure that I'm doing it in as small a way as possible in ways that seem logical. So we got this now addressed here in our reload shares inside of our database, and we've got this addressed here in our init where we declare this shares thing. There's one more thing that we can do to this reload shares to make life easier for us, and that's to give this function some extra functionality, because right now all it's doing is this simple load. But a lot of the times when we're trying to reload the shares and get whatever's changed in our database into our memory, we wouldn't want to rebuild the whole UI in order to reflect that to the user. Like if they've added a new file that they're sharing, or whatever, it's important to rebuild the UI so they see what was actually changed in memory. So I'm going to add an optional thing here where I say rebuild equals false. Because we've provided a default value to this, we don't have to provide a valid argument every time we're using this. So anywhere we're already using this reload shares thing, it can stay as is. We don't have to worry about it breaking. But in places where we do, in fact, know that we want to rebuild the UI, we just say reload shares and then put true inside the parentheses. And now we know that we want to do something new. So if rebuild is true, then we want to run the Dropbox GUI rebuild UI function. And that has just added extra functionality to this reload shares thing. So now I want to go through the whole program and make sure I'm being consistent about where we're using this reload shares, and just do things to basically optimize this so that we're not hitting the hard drive unnecessarily and we're using the memory efficiently. And there is a good example of that's right here in the database file. When I'm adding a share, obviously this is a time when I'm going to want to add the thing to our database. So whatever it is, it's added to the database here. And we're reloading shares correctly, like we're using the right thing, but now we need to add this true in order to rebuild the UI with it. So that's simply done. And now we've built, we're taking advantage of that extra functionality that we've built into this. So we don't have to worry about rebuilding the UI at some other stage after this. It's all one simple operation. So moving on into our networking file here. We've got this huge class that's doing all the things that do all the networking stuff. If you haven't seen those, like, you seriously should go watch the networking videos, because I break down the whole WebSockets thing and do an asynchronous code in what I think is the best way. Like, I'm genuinely very proud of the way that those videos came together. But here at where we're doing the whole file transfer stuff, we're doing this file receive. And it's going through the whole process of that. And there's a lot of things that go on in the file process. But then when we are saving this new version of the file to our database here, you see I'm not doing the reload shares. I'm being inconsistent here, and I'm doing the manual reload shares here, and I'm doing it wrong because this is throwing a cursor now into this. So let's be consistent. Dropbox, database, reload shares, and we don't have to rebuild from here. So that's another one off of our list. And we'll find a similar problem over in file management. In fact, when I was showing this off in the first place, where in our check local files thing here, I'm hitting the hard drive unnecessarily, doing this when we know now that we're being consistent with our loading of everything into the memory. We can rely upon it to be in memory, so we don't have to hit the database and the hard drive unnecessarily. So we can do a for share in this memory version of our shares. And likewise, we can make sure that at the bottom of this now, we're doing this correctly and using the Dropbox database reload shares. And this doesn't need to be, this doesn't need to be a rebuild. All right, we're almost to the point where we get to start making things pretty. There's two more things that need to be addressed. Now, back in our GUI file, in our main UI loop, I screwed up. I am not properly checking things as validated before I'm moving on. And that's a real mistake. So this could have caused a lot of nightmares if this went on. Right now, I'm not actually checking to make sure that somebody's given us a password. And they could, in fact, save a password here of nothing, and it lets them through. Now, we don't really care about the password locally, but the password's super important for all our networking stuff, for making sure that the people we connect to on our network are the people who we think they are. So we need to have a valid password in here. And in fact, if this was able to make a connection right now, it'd definitely break something. So let's make sure that we validate this before we move on to doing anything else. Like, you can't even run this program unless you provide a password. That's a super important thing here. So the first thing we do is check, is password a thing? And if it is, then we can move on to this other stuff. And we can save the settings if they want, but we're definitely going to put this value of password into our memory version of the settings in order for the networking stuff to work, because that's where the networking stuff is going to be looking for a password. So now we've ensured that that's going to work, and now If I try to do the same thing here, it's not going to let me through until I give it a valid password. Now, that's a me mistake, but there's also the potential for other similar user mistakes, and you just got to be prepared for these things. Like, in programming, you can make some amazing things happen, but as soon as it gets in the hands of a user, they're definitely going to break it. And they're going to break it in ways you never even imagined. So always be on the lookout for idiotic user behavior. And one of those is they could do the same thing where they give us a blank share. Like, they could come in here and share, and instead of actually browsing and selecting a file, they back out of there and accidentally hit confirm or whatever. And so you see, file not found. It was actually I was a little terrified about what was going to happen when I hit the button. That's good. That means some of our other code is actually correctly checking to see if things were wrong here. But we shouldn't even get to that point. Like, we shouldn't even let them hit this confirm button without something being here. Because honestly, if my existing code wasn't working correctly, it could have tried to make it could have broken in a lot of different ways, giving it a blank thing to create a share from. So let's just add the same sort of thing here. If value new share, then we get to move on and do all this stuff. Otherwise, just ignore it altogether. We don't care. You're not giving us anything. We're not doing anything. All right, we can finally get into the fun stuff of making our UI pretty. So at the very top of our GUI file, I've got a collection of colors that I have defined. And you're going to need to pick your own colors. And it doesn't matter what kind of project you're on, you're probably going to need 4 colors and a whitish color and a grayish color, or a blackish color, rather. So the way that I like to do this is use the Professional Design Sessions College color calculator here, where you just pick a color to start off with, and you can then get a whole bunch of color harmonies from that. And I recommend strongly you start off with any colors that are tricky. Green is a good example of this, because, like, man, you can get green really wrong. Yeah, okay, that's not a terrible example, but there are some pretty bad greens in there. Green is tricky, orange is tricky, yellow is really tricky. Find a shade of whatever you're looking for that's trickiest first, and once you got something that you like, then you're ready to move on to this next step where you choose a color harmony. And I just skip right ahead over this last one where we get a tetratic harmony, and here it gives me an orange, a red, and a blue that are related to this, and I can further refine it. Like, let's say I don't like that blue. Let's see what else we can get here. All right, that looks great. So now I've got an entirely harmonic series of colors that I can now use, and I'm saving their individual values here as variable. The off gray and off black are just personal preferences of mine. So you'll see now I'm assigning these variables to other variables. So I've got an accent variable here, which I'm assigning the green to. The highlight is getting the pink. The worn is getting the orange, and the text color is getting the off gray, while the background is getting the off black. And the reason I'm doing that is here where we're actually doing the theme creation inside of this dictionary. If I decide that I want to change the text color, I only have to change it right here. Like, I say that I want my blue to be the text color, so I just change it to my blue, and now it's changed that everywhere that the text color is used. And if I want to change any of these things, it's as simple as that. If I want to change it back, it's also as simple as that. So it's helpful to kind of break this off like that. So you see here, I've cheated and I already have all the prepared code. And the reason for that is the documents, the official documentation for PySimpleGUI says that you're supposed to just copy this code. And I want to point out something here. I have correctly copied out this code. But this part here is wrong. It looks like it's right. I mean, it's not giving me any kind of errors when I load it up, and you'll see it will load up fine without any errors. But we're going to see later on, like in, I guess, the next video, this is totally wrong. And I want to point out right now that it's showing that default progress bar color looks like a simple single thing that I'm supposed to stuff into this progress thing. So it's the progress bar color. I gave it a color, which is my highlight color. Okay, I'm pointing this out now, so we'll see in the future just how fucking insane the documentation for this whole thing is. So I'm pointing all this out now because we're going to run into several instances where the documentation for PySimpleGUI and the real world examples don't quite mesh or don't make any goddamn sense to me. And that's something I want to get ahead of, like right at the beginning here. I'm going to complain a lot about what I've had to deal with because the documentation is hard to follow. But PySimpleGUI really is the easiest way of doing a GUI that I've ever encountered. It really simplifies things for us. It makes life so much easier, but I'm going to complain about the documentation quite a lot. All right, so now that we've got this thing that we've defined as my own theme, we can load this up inside of our app and make use of it. So back in our init file where we're doing all the stuff for the window and stuff like this, where we set the current theme to default no more nagging, let's use our own by stuffing it in here. So we'll theme add new, and here it wants the name of the thing and then the thing itself. So let me import the thing that we want, my own theme. And yeah, we'll do that for now. So we're stuffing in that dictionary of my own theme and we're calling it mine. So here I just changed this to mine, and now we should immediately see the difference. Yay! All right, that looks better already, right? So now let's go back into our GUI file and start to really make this thing look pretty. So one thing we can do right off the bat is add our own kind of banner image. And this is going to be you see there's all kinds of different ways of going about this. We're going to be stuffing data in here because I've already gone through the process of creating all the images I'm going to use, and I've converted them into base 64. So I don't have to deal with any files. Like I don't have any extra files here. I've just got these base 64 strings. So to make use of this, all I need to do is go back into our GUI file here and import Dropbox image set, and down here I'm specifically giving it data and not a file, so it knows what to do with that. And it is going to be Dropbox.ImageSet banner. And let me go into the database thing here real quick and take away the password so it shows the login. Now we got a nice big pretty banner that shows up. Like, our program is already looking so much better. Now, as you saw at the beginning of this video, I've already gone through the lengthy process of designing the interface. Like it's something that takes a lot of time. It would be disingenuous for me to like pretend here that I'm like, oh yeah, so this text needs to be a size maybe 20 by, like, I'm not gonna do that. All right. I have no idea what the size is supposed to be, but I've already done this, so I'm gonna just copy that off of the totally working version of this because man, like it really does take a really, really long time to do all this right. Like it's just an unfortunate thing that you're going to have to deal with. Like programming is hard. Programming takes a long damn time sometimes. So in fact, I don't actually want a size thing on this. I want it to be padded out by 15 by 1. But I also want to change the font of this. So like I've been doing with these, my own color variables, I'm going to create some font variables. Ooh. So a base font is going to be and all the fonts are supposed to be tuples. So here it's going to be Montserrat. I think I spelled that right. Let me double check. I did. Yay. Okay. Which is a nice free file. You can get it off Google. If this is not installed on the computer that runs it, it'll just use a default one, which will be fine. But if they have it installed, and they should because it's a very pretty font, it will now show up, and wherever I declare that it should be used, it will be used at 12 points here. Let's make a bold version of this. Montserrat 12. And then here we do another string of just bold. Oops. And I want a bigger version of this that's going to be 14 points. Yeah. And a biggest, which is going to be 16 and bold. Okay. I'm really glad that I added Montserrat to the dictionary in PyCharm, or else that would definitely have gotten that wrong there. Now I come back down here and I'm looking at this password and I want to add a font to it. And what kind of font do I want? I want the biggest. Oh yeah. So you see that I'm getting this scary looking underline here that's definitely indicating I'm screwing up, right? And it says, if I mouse over it, you see it's showing that it's expecting a special form of this weird thing, and it got a tuple thing instead. And the reason for these errors on these fonts, as well as the keys, is bizarre. It's kind of like a cross between PyCharm's fault and their fault. If I click through in this, you'll actually see the source code for PySimpleGUI here. And we can look at how it's doing its type hinting. And it's doing it in this doc string, which PyCharm doesn't actually support. And for some reason, it gets confused on these unions. I don't know why it does that. And I've talked to PyCharm about this, and they're like, we don't support this, so they're not going to do anything about it. Let me double check how I did this. So for the keys and the fonts, we're going to have to change this. And this is a bad idea. It's called monkey patching, but for the purpose of this video, I'm going to actually change the thing that we've downloaded here in order to avoid any kind of future problems. So I guess I'll do the key here because I see how to do that right now. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to do a Control R to replace it. And I'm going to replace that with a key should be tuple. So I'm changing it from union string, tuple object, all this stuff, to a tuple of some object and maybe some other object outside of that tuple is what this type hinting says specifically. I haven't really covered type hinting too much because I don't use it that much. It's useful sometimes. It's kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. So here I'm just going to replace all the instances of the key are now going to be looking for objects of whatever, and we're not worried about unions anymore. Let me do the same thing for the fonts now. All right, so here we're going to change it from a union that you see it could be a string and a tuple of a string and an integer. We're going to change that to just being a tuple that can be a string or a tuple string integer. We're just replacing the union here with a tuple. We're replacing all those, and as I come back to here, all the scary red squigglies go away. And the only reason I'm doing this is because I need to see the red squigglies when I'm screwing up and I'm doing a video. You should not do weird things to your files that you're downloading through pip, because now this is inconsistent, and if you give this to somebody else, they download it, they're not going to have the same exact version of this that you have. In this case, since we're just changing basically the comments, that's fine, but it's called monkey patching, and you're probably not supposed to be doing it. But Python is a language that lets you do that, so you know, nobody's telling you can't, you just shouldn't. Let's move on now to include all the other things that we're doing. So let's make the size of this input field here much bigger to fill it out, and the font is going to be the biggest, and that is now over the line here for pep 8, so I'm going to bring that down here, and let's see what we got. So wow, yeah, everything is much bigger, and this is something that I personally struggled with a lot when I was learning how to design. I like tight, efficient minimalism, so I would often let, you know, the way that it was initially, I'd let it stay that way because I liked it being tight and compact, but that's a terrible way to design things. If you're designing something for humans, make it nice and big and friendly. Humans like nice, big, and friendly. So by spacing things out, it really does make it look a lot more friendly to them. So let's do the same thing here. Now we're going to make everything bigger and friendlier. So for the save password, and although I'm copying, I'm doing this manually, so I'll remember to tell you any kind of important things that I note while I'm doing this. And one of those things is I'm going to make sure that I'm consistent about my padding on the leftmost element of every row. So in PyCharm, every single one of these lists that you see here is a different row. So we've got the image, and then we got an empty text that we're using as a spacer. And then we got another row that's got this text and the input text. And then we got another row below that, which is the check block. So the leftmost item on here, the thing that says password colon and the thing that says save password, we're making sure that they're both padded in by 15. And a thing to note here is that PySimpleGUI is super inconsistent about when you're talking about characters and when you're talking about pixels. Usually, like 90% of the cases, I think, when you see size, we're talking about characters. So we're saying here that the password field should be a size of 30 characters by 1 character high. And we're padding it by pixels. So we're saying that the password here and the save password should both be padded in by 15 pixels. But, and this is super important to keep in mind when you're designing things, this isn't just the left side that we're padding in. Okay, so the pad here is both horizontal sides get padded. So you can actually see that in what we had here, where it's padding it here on the right and the left, which looks fine here, but it's something to keep in mind. So by keeping the padding consistent on all of our left side elements, it's going to make them line up nicely. So that's already looking better. Oh wait, I actually wanted this to be biggest too. All right, so on this next one, this is our warning thing. So we want to make sure we change our color to that orange that I defined as worn. And again, we want this to be big, but not too big. So I think we're just going with font bold on this, right? Yeah, okay. But again, we need to be consistent with our padding. So I'm going to add a pad 15.1. And I'm missing a comma here. Is that right? That looks right. All right. Let me show you what we've got so far, because this next thing is going to be really interesting. So, okay, here's our big scary warning thing when it's not doing random numbers at us to prove that it's doing asynchronous stuff. Like, that's the reason, if you see this spinning, it's just to prove that it's doing the UI. The UI is being responsive. I'm typing in here, and it is doing stuff in the background. Because every single time that number changes, it's going back through its whole process here. Now, these buttons are going to be an interesting challenge. I want consistency among all of the text buttons in my program. So I'm going to define some basic properties that I'm going to want every button to have. So I'm going to call this button props. And I'm going to put these in as a dictionary, because we're going to expand the dictionary in as these arguments here. So one thing that I know I'm always going to want is the font of these should always be the font bold. And the size of these should, gonna screw that up several times, a tuple that says 7 by 2, because I want it to be 7 characters wide and 2 characters tall. And I think that's it. Oh, no, that's right. I also want a border width. Is it underscore? Yeah. That's another thing that PySimpleGUI is inconsistent about is they finally got it snake case, but a lot of things were camel case, so you'd have an uppercase W or whatever. But, okay. Now that we've got this like this, we can just stuff that into here. So I'm going to do that by simply doing a comma here. And we used a single star to unpack a list. We used double star to unpack a dictionary. And this is going to unpack all of these keys and values to be basically the same way it's showing up here as font equals and key equals and all this. It's going to be font equals, size equals, and border width equals. We'll see that here. We got a nice big flat button. That's what the border width 0 is doing. You see how this is slightly raised and this is much flatter. So if we come back now, we can add that to the quit. But this doesn't quite look right. Like the connector, it's filling up that too much. We want to add some extra width to these buttons in particular. But I know all of my other buttons in this program are going to be a size of 7 too. So let me show you a way to override that. We're going to do button bigger. And here I'm making a new dictionary, and I'm going to expand this dictionary inside of our new dictionary. So I'm going to do the double star here, button props, and anything I put in after that that is the same as, like if I use the same key here for size and I give it a new value, that's going to overwrite whatever it unpacks here. There's a new way to do that in Python 3.9 using like I think it's a bar equals. There's a new way to do it in Python 3.9. We're not doing that because we're in Python 3.7 for this project. So this is the old-fashioned way of overriding a dictionary thing if you want to use a dictionary in multiple places. So let's change this now from our button props to our button bigger. And now we got nice, big, spacious buttons. Again, I really want to provide big, spacious buttons to people. In fact, we should probably put a padding between these. What padding did I decide on? Yes, a padding of 20 by 5. So again, big spacious buttons, but it looks kind of dumb off to the left like this. So let's put these both inside of a column. So remember, each one of these lists here represents a row. I'm working in the same row that's got these. I'm going to add a SG column, and I'm going to stuff all of that inside of there. But this wants a list too, so I'm going to grab all that and put that inside of a list. In fact, does it want 2 lists? It wants 2 lists. All right, fine. It wants a list of lists. There we go. It stops complaining. So now I've got all of this stuff inside of a column. I can interact with both of these at the same time. And this is super important when you're designing all these elements, because the remember, the padding is going to be the left and the right. So if we try to do some sort of crazy like pad by 50 or whatever to pad this out into the center, it would push the quit button off by 50 as well. So we want to make sure we're consistent in our spacing here. So we're stuffing them both inside of a column, and now this column I can give a padding or whatever. And I'm actually going to use the justification function of this and tell it center. So it's going to be this big column, and we're telling it to put everything inside of the column in the center. And this should look good. And it does. Yay. Okay. Good. So now we've got our nice looking interface here. Let's move on now to make the rest of this all pretty. So we're going to go on to our main pane. If you didn't watch all the other previous videos, we've got our program set up as a series of panes, and they're all present at once, but we change which one's visible based on whatever the user is doing. So this layout now is the main layout. If you've given a password or you already had a password saved, this is the first thing you see. And we're going to add a banner to this and a snag button to match the share button. And the banner for this one is going to be a little different because we don't want it to be huge. So I've got another banner that I made that is smaller, and it's got a bunch of blank space to it to kick out the buttons to a specific width to make things consistent. All of the images that I'm using are pings with transparency. So there's going to be this transparency that's kicking the buttons out to a specific width that is useful. So let me show you what we've got right now. So we got this, and we actually want the buttons to be on the same row as that. So let me move that up into this list here, and we'll add in our button props. And I'm going to copy this now and make another button that's called snag. And we use the share button to present the user with the interface they're going to use for adding a new file that they want to share on the network. And a snag is going to be how they decide which files that are available on the network they want to now have copied locally. So with the button props, that's looking really nice here. I think I had to use a column though for reasons. Oh yeah, okay, so I want to add a little bit of spacing here. So I'm going to do a pad 5 and 0 in this case, because I don't want to actually add any amount of vertical padding. I just want to add a little bit of horizontal padding to space these two out. And I'm putting both of them inside of a column so I can interact with them the same way we're doing up here with the connect and quit. So stuffing that in here, and oh, what happened there? All right, and this needs a list of lists. All right, we'll leave that as is for now. This is what we got. It's already looking great. It's big and spacious. Like that's the key. Like honestly, maybe there could have been greater spacing between these, but because the buttons themselves are so big, I don't think that's a problem. Like there's a nice big fun to click on buttons. That's where buttons do things, and they're taking us to new and interesting places. Let's now make the share one look good. So we scroll down now to find where we're making the layout share, and here I'm going to add again a image, and we're going to use the same inner banner. So Dropbox image set inner banner. I'm trying to remember. I gotta put padding on both of these. I didn't. All right. So a big thing that I'm trying to do here is make sure that when the user is clicking through to different parts of the app, it looks like they're not being presented with entirely new windows. I want to make it like it's the same window that's just changing a little bit for them. So I'm trying to make sure the spacing is consistent between these different panes. So using 10s and 6 as the padding on the image in both of these windows. So let me show you here. This should look consistent. Yay! Okay, so the banner is staying in the same place. We're going to make sure that the width and everything else stays consistent. But for right now, I just want to make sure that we're getting consistency here, so it doesn't look as weird as it is right now with all this resizing and stuff. So, all right, we're on the right track here. Let's make now the thing that's telling us what we're doing. We're going to make that nice, big, friendly instructions. Or actually bigger. And I'm pushing this way out with a size of 75 by 1, which is honestly way bigger than it needs to be. But that's how I'm going to push this so that there is a consistent width between all these different panels. So we're also adding a padding of 10 by 5 to, well, now we need to make sure that we keep everything else lined up with that. So everything else that's on the left-hand side needs to be padded out by 10 at least. This is less important, but we're going to stay consistent now as we move now onto the actual input box where the share that they select appears in. We want to make that really big though. I want this to be, again, huge and friendly. And this is also going to get a big size increase here to 57 and 1. And now for this file browse, this button doesn't have a border width property. So if I pump in the button props here, it's going to break. So we could, no, we actually can't do an override here because like we could do something like this where we're breaking that up. You see, it's not giving me any errors because that is consistent. Like that's the right way that you would do this, where you could try to make a new dictionary by expanding this dictionary, and then you would like say size or whatever that you're going to try to overwrite. But in this case, what we want to do is change this border width to nothing. I don't think this works because it's going to basically what it would be doing is saying border width equals none, and you see that's not good. And since this doesn't even have the border width property, we can't do that. So what we're going to have to do here instead is to just manually redo the relevant things, which in this case is just the font, which we made font bold, and the size should be 7 by 2 rather. What's this complaint about? Oh, because I added that. All right. And again, I'm just adding some extra padding to make it look a little friendlier. The share status is going to be another warning thing. Like if something's gone wrong, we got to let the user know about that. So let's use our warn color. And again, we're going to need to make sure that the padding is consistent. So this should be 10 by 5. And the size, did I change that? I don't think I did. I did not. All right. And fortunately here for our confirm and cancel, we can just use the button props that we've already been using. I do want to pad out the left one to give it a little bit of space. Since again, this is going to be 10 on the left, 10 on the right, so it gives us some nice spacing. And it stays consistent with this 10 that we're doing on the leftmost element of everything in here. And I've also added a additional one of these empty texts. And this is specifically to pad out the bottom, so to keep the height the correct height of our window. So I'm giving this a padding of 0 for the horizontal, but 42 for the vertical. Let's see what we got now. So yeah, it's staying consistent now vertically, or horizontally rather, where as we're switching between these two views, it doesn't look like it's resizing as much. We're going to make the main as tall as this is, which is why we had to kick this way down here. So we got room for that warning message, and we got the buttons here doing their thing. And yeah, let's keep moving on. Oh yeah, I nearly forgot. I made myself a little hint here, and I nearly forgot to do it. I'm really glad I used this numbering system, because that's how I found this. So Clive Stephenson made a really important comment on YouTube that I want to demonstrate his issue here. So if you go into this share thing and you select a thing that you want to share, it is going to populate right here. And if you confirm, then it goes and it shows it here, but it actually did a rebuild of the whole screen. So when we go back to the share here, this is blank. But what happens if you go in here and you say like, well, I want to share this thing. But no, you know what? I've changed my mind. I don't want to share it. Now, if we go back into the share, this is still populated with that other thing. So it doesn't seem very intuitive that that should be the case, right? Because we're used to programs that are already going to do things for us. So we hit the cancel. We expect that to just be clear. But every single program that you've ever experienced that did that, the programmer had to make that happen. Like, programs don't just do things. So we need to tell it to clear this out. And fortunately, that's really easy to do. We're just going to go down to our button logic here. At the very bottom of this, we've got our UI loop here. And here's that cancel that happens where it makes the main panel visible and the share panel invisible. We're going to address that, which is the new share, and just give it an update message of a blank or an empty string here, and that will blank it out for us. So if we go back in and try that same thing again, where I pick a file, I hem and I haw and I cancel, and come back in, it's now cleared out for us. So throughout the whole video series, we've had this default Python icon for the icon for our app, but we can do our own. Like I made an icon, so let's use that instead. So I'm going to go into where we declare that window in our init, which is right here. We can specify our own icon by simply doing icon, and again, oh shit, I gotta import the image set icon, and just stuff that right here. And as I run it, we now have an icon. So in addition to it showing up here in the program itself, it's also showing up in my task bar, but you can't see that because I got this privacy thing here. But you do see as I mouse over it that it's showing off this nice icon everywhere instead of the default icon. So that's another little thing that we're doing to pretty things up. Let's make sure that we do this now in the rebuild, because remember, we rebuild the whole window every time we do a rebuild. So we need to go up to our rebuild function and make sure that we're stuffing that in here. So let's do the same thing here. We're going to do Dropbox image set icon. And there's another thing I want to show off here where whenever it does a rebuild, in fact, let me make a little function that's going to trigger the rebuild for our snag event. I'm going to just call the rebuild for debugging purposes here. So every time I push this, it's rebuilding the whole UI. If I move the UI and I click that, it puts it back here because we're not telling it to stay where I want it to be. So this could be really annoying. Like, let's say I push this off into a second window and I push this now. Well, it comes back here. Like, that would really piss me off if I was using a program that kept on refreshing itself and popping back into my main monitor when I did it. Go over here. So let's give it location information and make it obey that location information. And that's fortunately really easy. Again, like I'm going to complain a whole bunch about PySimpleGUI, but it really does make life so much easier. We just add in location and we give it whatever the current location is, because we don't actually kill the window that we're using until we've created this new window. So we can right now ask the currently extent window, okay, window, Dropbox window, where are you? I can't remember if that's a function or a property. Let's find out. Yeah, it was a function. Okay, so see, it's now polling it, saying, okay, what's your current location? And it's stuffing that into this location equals before it kills the old window and makes the new one. So the new one just pops up instantly in the old one's place. In fact, let me double check that it actually works on second monitors here. Yeah, okay, good. So it's wherever I tell it to be, it's going to keep on being there. And that's a nice little user-friendly feature. We could also like actually save this to the database so that every time we load it up, it would always pop in the same place if we wanted to. I'm just going to keep moving on though. Because this next thing is something I'm looking forward to. We're going to stop having these ugly X's and we're going to make like real image buttons here. So up here where we're making this whole thing here, we don't need to enumerate anymore. So I'm going to get rid of that bit here. Just make this a simple for share in our memory instance shares here. You see, we were using the index for the way that we were doing this remove thing. That's dumb and bad. So let's not do that. Instead of even doing this whole remove as the instruction underscore the thing we want to do, we can provide tuples as keys. So let's do that. So the tuple here is going to consist of an instruction, in this case, remove. And the thing that I want it to remove, we're just going to give it the ID of this specific share that it's populating itself with. Oh yeah, and I split it up into these names and actions. I'll show you why we shouldn't do that in a second here. So for this, I can change the image of this using the image data. And I've already got that prepared as well. So I'm going to image set, and in this case, I'm looking for the delete image. And I'm probably going to have to pad this and do other things, but let me show you what we got right now. Okay, so you see how it's doing the thing that all of our buttons are doing, because we told it in our theme here to make buttons green, I'm sure. Yeah, our text color is white and our exit color is the green. So it's doing what we were told it to do, but we don't want to do that right here because this is an image now instead of a text button, and this image has transparency. So let's use that transparency by changing the background of this, or what was it, the color? Button color, yeah. Okay, we have to give it something for the text, and it doesn't even matter what it is because we're not showing text. And then we're going to use the background color so that it will show up as the same thing. Oh, and we have to give it the border width of 0. So now it'll show up looking like the background. So that's nice. And now we're getting this useful tuple, which is telling us the thing that it wants to do and the specific place that it wants us to be doing that thing too. So that's looking good. Let me show you now how I went about getting these images. There's a couple of ways you can do this. The easiest way is I'm going to be providing you with all these images. When this goes up on GitHub, I'm going to have all the images for you in this image set file. But if you're working on another project and you need to come up with your own images, there's a couple of ways of going about this. There's the hard way, which is to give Adobe $50 a month and then watch like 10 or 20 hours worth of Illustrator tutorials, and then you can make your own icons. Or we go to Font Awesome and you type in whatever the hell you're looking for. So like delete, yeah. And it'll give you a whole bunch of different options, and you don't have to pay for any of the ones that are solid. So you see these ones that say Pro and they're grayed out, you got to pay for those. But any of the other ones, you can just click on that, and it takes you to there, and there's going to be a little download thing. And this lets you download it as an SVG, but it's asking you to agree to something first. And this is very important, okay? Before you download this icon, you need to understand that it is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License, and requires that you comply with the following. You must give appropriate credit, provide a link to the license, and indicate if changes were made. So I've already done this in the image thing. There have been a lot of weird licenses out there in the world, and a lot of people might have a preconceived notion of what some of those licenses are because, like, man, GPL ruined it for everybody in the professional world because nobody wanted to be stuck to the GPL license. But this is a friendly, easy Creative Commons license. All it's asking us to do is to link to this license and provide credit to the person who's done that. So I've done that already here. I've said that the delete, the revert, and the download images that I'm using are provided by fontawesome.com, and they are under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0, and I've listed the link to that license. And I've made it clear that the icon and the banner images are by me, and I link to my piracy policy. So we can do this. We can just download this now and agree to it. But there's a slight problem, however, because these are all going to show up with black as the color that they show up on. So the SVG, if we just take this straight into a ping converter here, is going to output black images with white transparencies, or clear transparency rather, which wouldn't work well for us here because we got this dark background. So fortunately, SVG files are editable. Like they're just basically text where you get this long ass path of the vector in the scalable vector graphics, and you'll see a fill thing. I forget what the fill thing was originally, but I just changed it to FF, which is the hex code for pure white. So by making the fill of the path white, it makes the icon itself white, or the image that's being rendered here white, with the transparency preserved so that we have a consistent color here. So once you've downloaded the image, edited the image, added the Creative Commons license to your image file here, we're going to want to move on to converting that to a ping. And I like this site, this svg2ping.me, because it lets you resize it and set specifically the size that you want. That's really important because these scalable vector graphics are scalable. Like, they have no fixed size. You have to specify the size. And some of these svg2ping sites don't let you pick the size. And again, we're using ping because it includes transparency. So that's important to us. Now, once we've got that done, we got the pings produced. We come over to you can use any site that does this, ping to base64, and that's where I drag in the actual binary ping file, and it pops out the base64, which I pasted into here, remembering to put a B at the front of this, because that's an important Python distinction in Python. When it has a B before the quotes or whatever, that's letting it know that this is a bytes-like object that I'm treating as a string. And that's really important for a lot of reasons. But the biggest is when we're saying, we're giving you data, it knows that it's going to get a bytes-like object as data. We're going to add another button to this here, which is going to be our revert. We're saving multiple copies of things. Like, whenever a file changes, we save the previous version and the new change so that we can revert to any old versions, because, man, that sort of versioning system has saved my ass so many times. I really like that kind of versioning, so I am going to make sure that my program here includes that. And you see the underline here, it's complaining about pep8. I guess we can fix that real quick here like this. But in PyCharm, there's a Control-Shift-J that makes any line pop up to the line that you're on right now, and just hitting enter immediately did the resize for me, or the refit, so that's nice and lined up. And we're complying with pep8, yay. So let's see what we got now. Yay, we got two different icons, but this looks a little weird, doesn't it? Like, to have the icons over here, for some reason that just feels super weird to me. So I think I want to put this off on the left of these, because right now we got this like ragged edge and then straight line, straight line. If we put these over on the left side, then it's straight line, and then another straight line before that ragged edge. So let's do that. I guess I'm going to continue to do this share actions and share names as two different lists that we're appending, because that is kind of an interesting thing where we're making these two different lists and we're adding them to two different columns, but they still line up, kinda. So yeah, okay, that did not do anything. What the fuck? Oh yeah. So It's just saying, we got these two different columns. Now we have to switch their positions. So let's do that. The actions here and the names here. Not just change where we define the lists. All right, so yeah, that's looking so much better. All right, let me add now a progress bar here. And for this, thinking, what do we need? We're going to need a key for it. And it's going to be progress and whatever the share ID is. And we're definitely going to need to resize this in some way. Why is that? That's the key. That's closing the progress bar. What don't you like about this? Oh, okay. It needs a max value. What is the maximum that this progress bar can be? And we'll just put it 100 here. Yeah, that's good. What do we got? All right. So that looks extra weird. I guess I can't push this off anymore. I'm going to show you why having these two columns actually turns out to be a terrible idea. If I keep on grabbing things and saying that, hey, look, I want to grab some more of these files and oh shit, that's not already in there. I want to grab more of these files. Oh, fuck. Oh, okay. This is a very teachable moment. So it's saying that, I was trying to perform an update on this thing, but I can't do that because the window wasn't finalized or read. And then, you need to set a finalize equals true parameter to your window at creation, and that'll fix this problem. So, okay. The problem was that we were trying to update things, and then the window wasn't ready for the update, so things got screwed up. So let's make sure that we're finalizing true on the rebuild. It wants us to, among the many things that we've got going on here, we've got the icon, the border width, location. Let's add in a finalize equals true. And you'll see that I've already done that in this Windows declaration here. But specifically in this GUI one where it's doing the rebuild, let's make sure we're finalizing equals true. And that means I should definitely not encounter that error when I add another file in here. I mean, there's no way we've added the finalize equals true. This is going to work 100% of the time. And the finalize equals true is a lie. It is just a bold lie right here that it keeps on telling you to do this. Like, there's a lot of different errors it tells you to do this for. It does nothing. It fixes none of the errors. So this is actually an issue that we're going to address probably in the next video here. So let's see, is it showing up now? I'm trying to, okay, good. It's showing up. The problem that we're facing here is that by having these two different columns, you see how the icon, and progress bar are lining up nicely, but this other column is no longer lining up nicely with that one. And man, we will be in just resize hell if we try to match this. Like, say, okay, well, maybe the font size of this is font bold. Does that work? And like, well, no, that doesn't work. Now it's going too far the other way. Okay, well, now do we add sizes over here? Don't do any of this. This is just a terrible thing. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea when I first started putting in these, 10 months ago. Let's just have one list that we're going to stuff into one column. And we're going to call that one list our share list. And we're going to stuff everything is going to be on one row. So we need to make sure we're inside of the square brackets here. And I add our file name, and honestly, the file name should be on the other side of this progress bar here. Oh, whoops. Change it everywhere. All right. So now we got another problem where our ragged edge here, like we got this nice clean line, and the ragged edge now has changed the spacing of everything because the progress bar is now kind of all over the place. We can fix this very easily by setting a specific width to the file name here. If we set a hard size, it will not exceed that. So like if we set it to like 20 and 1 here, That's immediately going to give us, I don't know if that's the right number, I'm going to check it in a second here, but that is going to immediately give us a line. It says, it doesn't matter how big this text happens to be, the text label itself is 20 characters wide. Let me double check now with the previous version to see what I did here. All right, so I did not use a bold here. This is just a normal font. And the size was close, 25. And we're padding it by 10 on all sides. Yeah. Let's see what that looks like now. All right, that's nice big space between all these. Everything's looking nice. Yeah, we need to set some specifics here now for this progress bar here. So the first one is we can change the orientation of this. So if we wanted a vertical, we could do vertical. If we wanted horizontal, it kind of defaults to that, but we can make sure that it always does by just giving it this H. We can do the same thing with the justification. We could put an R here for right or C here for center. We could put H here or full out horizontal. Let's just do an H because we're going to need room for adding in a size of 37 and 20. This is a big thing. And you can tell right off the bat, this is not a character. Like, oh my God, dude, seriously, the documentation for this. If we go, we're in the source code now, the size equals none. I'm giving it a tuple, right? And over here, it's going to tell us the size. Where's this? Size int. Like that's size of the bar. Characters wide, pixels high. Vertical, pixels wide. Okay, so it does actually correctly say it's pixels high here. In a lot of places it doesn't say that, but it's super weird that they're blending these two together. Like, okay, now it's characters versus pixels, and if it's vertical, then it's pixels versus pixels. They're so inconsistent throughout all of this. You really got to be paying attention to it. But obviously, if it's 20 high here, it's going to be pixels and not characters, because that would be a paragraph, like a goddamn essay. So I'm going to pad this now by 0 horizontal and 10 vertical. And let's see what we've got now. So this is all looking really good. I'm very happy with how this is looking so far. We could potentially push this out. Well, we'll worry about that later. Like, honestly, this has probably been long enough for the first video. In the next video, we'll add like scroll bars and make this even more pretty. Thank you very much to my Patreon patrons for making these videos possible. Take it easy, folks.